Well, let me ask you a question. If someone knows of a dogma, okay, and then teaches contrary to that dogma, is he a heretic?
If a person knows of a dogma and teaches contrary, absolutely the person would be a heretic.
Okay.
If they're going against the dogmatic teaching of the faith,
okay, that's what
without the individual is heretic. Unless, of course,
that's what they do.
No, I just completely disagree. I don't think you have any way to prove that point that you're attempting to prove right now.
So you don't believe that they teach contrary to dogmas?
I do not believe that any of the popes you label as manifest heretics, according to the biblical usage of the term heretic, I don't think any of them fit that criteria.
Well, but we have to understand the term heretic the way the Church teaches it, and the Church teaches that those who dissent from an authoritative teaching of the magisterium are to be considered heretics. That's the teaching of the Church. And so your claim is that they actually do not contradict the teaching of the Catholic Church. Is that your...
Absolutely.
Okay, are you familiar with the joint declaration with the Lutherans on justification?
Absolutely. The Bible was put together by the Catholic Church, so I do believe that we can use the Bible as a clear definition for the term heretic.
Right, and
I don't think that you're using it in the biblical term. You're far from it.
Well, actually, your argument proves nothing at all. Titus 3:11, where it talks about how he's condemned by his own judgment, simply reiterates the truth of divine revelation that heretics bring the sentence down on themselves ipso facto. They don't need another to bring it down by virtue of the fact that they've departed from the teaching of the Church, and that's why the Second Council of Constantinople says that very thing. He says that the heretic leaves the Church by his own judgment, by his own decision to not conform to the teaching of the Church. And so, let me ask you this. Is the joint declaration with the Lutherans on justification heretical? Do you know anything about it?
Yes, I do know. I do know about it. If you like, I can pull up the document. I do not believe it's heretical. And touch on a point you mentioned, if I'm allowed to touch on a point you mentioned just a little while ago, you say that Titus 3:11 shows that the individual stands self-condemned. I don't know if you'd mind if I asked you, Titus 3:10 and 3:11, what is it exactly that makes this individual a heretic?
By the fact that he refuses to conform to the rule of the Catholic faith. By the fact that he refuses to submit his mind and accept Catholic teaching.
So after a first and second admonition, we can clearly see that this individual is then a heretic, because since he doesn't want to listen, he doesn't want to recognize, or he refuses to recognize they're false, even after being confronted with them, he then stands self-condemned.
Well, it's not only talking about the concept of what makes people heretics, it's also incorporating the concept of avoiding heretics. And so that's why there's also a discussion of after the second admonition. But all of your points prove nothing at all. Okay, they simply can...
respond to them.
Oh, yeah, I have. Yeah, because you admitted that someone who dissents, who knows of a dogma and teaches contrary to it, is a heretic.
You're right, but I don't admit to your interpretation of the papal documents. And again, this verse...
No, I asked you a question. Is someone who teaches contrary to a dogma a heretic?
I answered that question already. I didn't.
Okay, so you agree. So what it really comes down to... Let me finish. Okay, what it really comes down to here is whether they are teaching contrary to dogmas. Okay? And
absolutely.
And in the joint declaration with the Lutherans on justification, they agree, they teach, that the condemnations against Lutheran teaching in the Council of Trent no longer apply. That is blatantly heretical. That is to state that dogmatic canons no longer apply. They also teach that faith alone is not condemned by Trent, even though justification by faith alone was specifically condemned by Trent. They teach that the other Lutheran heresies, such as totally just and a sinner at the same time, is not condemned by Trent. That is manifest heresy. What would you say in response to that?
You're cracking up. I can't hear you at all. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, I can hear you clearly now. Okay.
Okay. So,
I missed the last thing that you said. Right after you said faith alone, you cut off.
Yeah. The joint declaration with the Lutherans on justification teaches that the canons of the Council of Trent, which condemned Lutheran teaching, no longer apply. I'll quote it. This is number 3. Quote, "This joint declaration shows that the remaining differences are no longer the occasion for doctrinal condemnations." Quote, that's blatantly heretical. It also says, "In light of this consensus, the corresponding doctrinal condemnations of the 16th century do not apply to partner. And so the anathemas that the Council of Trent issued against Lutheran teaching and the Lutherans no longer apply according to the heretics Benedict XVI and John Paul II. That is
right. In the sense, were you finished?
Go ahead. You can.
Okay. In the sense of the current understanding, in the sense of the way Lutheran teaching has evolved, they would definitely, in certain aspects, not apply, because in the sense of speaking of faith alone, it's definitely not referring to the biblical sense, Calvinist or the Lutheran sense of intellectualist sense only. It's referring faith alone as well can be viewed in an Orthodox manner, and that's simply the way that we see the term being used here. In that sense, faith alone definitely would not be heretical, and some of the condemnations definitely would not be valid today, because as understood, and if you would read some Lutheran teachings, you would find this, a lot of the teachings of Lutheranism have evolved. And in essence, Lutherans, you really can't find them believing what they believed back when Martin Luther was around. Ever since Luther passed on, the teachings have been in a state of evolution.
Yeah.
And so in the sense of referring to Trent, it's definitely not contradicting Trent in any way at all, because if the Lutherans were to still believe the exact same teachings that were condemned by Trent, then it would definitely be heretical. They would not be able to have any joint declaration. None of the terms would be able to be understood in an Orthodox manner. In that sense, there would be no joint declaration whatsoever.
Well, that is what you just said is blatantly heretical. The Council of Trent. No, it's a fact. The Council of Trent declared in Session 6, Chapter 10. You see that by works a man is justified and not by faith alone. It condemned the ideas of faith alone 13 different times, approximately. Let me finish.
Yeah.
Okay. And in fact, when it justifies the Lutheran idea of faith alone, it says, quote, according to Lutheran understanding, God justifies sinners in faith alone, sola fide, end quote. And so it says that is not condemned by Trent, the teaching of the Lutherans on faith alone and the other heresies. For instance, in this joint declaration, it also says that, quote, number 29, Lutherans understand this condition of the Christian as being at the same time righteous and sinner. That's Martin Luther's classic heresy, that those who are justified are not truly interiorly sanctified. Okay, it says it's not heresy. This is Lutheranism being justified here. Okay, it also says in number 21 of the joint declaration, human beings are incapable of cooperating in their salvation. That's not condemned according to this heretical agreement. And even if what you were saying was true, which is not, it's insane and absurd, it would be proven to be heretical because it says in number 5 that it shows that the remaining differences are no longer the occasion for doctrinal condemnations. That's heretical because they don't accept the Council of Trent. And the very fact that they don't accept the Council of Trent, no matter what they believe, that is a proof that they are in heresy, and they are condemned by Trent. And so it's saying they're not condemned anymore. That is an example of blatant heresy. And to deny it is just to be a liar.
All right, well, I guess I'm not going to get into any accusations of calling anybody a liar. I think as it's evidenced in your attempt at exegesis of Titus 3:10, I think you're simply confused. You went on to quote what faith alone meant according to the ancient Lutheran understanding, and that definitely is still in condemnation. You come out saying, reading that, I don't know what your point was. I think maybe you completely misunderstood what I was attempting to explain, that faith alone can be understood in an Orthodox sense, as it is used numerous times by many church fathers in a completely Orthodox sense. I guess you completely misunderstood that. I mean, do you think that that I agree to faith alone in the ancient Lutheran sense of the term?
Well, see, here's the blatant error you just made. You said that I was quoting the ancient Lutheran teaching. Actually, I was quoting the joint declaration. Okay, so that proves my point that the joint declaration is justifying the classical Lutheran heresy. And so you first denied that, and then you just admitted that, because when I quoted that, you said I'm quoting the ancient Lutheran teaching. No, I was quoting the joint declaration, William, which is blatantly heretical.
I wasn't talking about.
But let me ask you this: Is it heresy? Is it heresy for Lutherans? Is it heresy?
Finish my point first before you move on. I mean, I would like to finish my point.
Okay, go ahead. You did ask me a question. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't asking you a question. I was, previously. But anyway, you brought up, I wasn't referring to the fact that you were quoting, the portion you were quoting. What I was referring to was your interpretation when you mentioned what Lutherans believed, when you mentioned the doctrine of sola fide. That is what I was referring to.